A blind Wellington man who's twice been told he can't take his guide dog on a bus says he was made to feel like a non-person and the drivers need training. George Taggart tried to get on a Wellington Metlink bus outside the Blind Foundation in Adelaide Road yesterday with 3 blind friends. They all had white canes and George had Guss, his guide dog. Guss, who's a poodle, was wearing a harness and guide dog tags, and George was carrying a photo ID that identifies him as sight impaired and Guss as his assistance dog. George Taggart picks up the story at the point he and Guss tried to get on the number 23 Metlink bus just before noon yesterday.
I stepped up on the bus and the driver says, "Get off my bus." And I said, "I beg your pardon, this is a guide dog and I'm allowed on the bus with my guide dog." And he said, "It's not a guide dog, get off the bus." And I said, "Well, look, he has, my dog's got a harness on him and he has a collar with tags on it that identify him as a guide dog. And I have a passport in my wallet." And he said, "I don't care, get off the bus. I've got a job to do," or something along those lines. And I said, "No, I'm not getting off the bus." And he said something about he was going to call the police. And I said, "Well, fine, you call the police. I'll just stand here until they come." I kept repeating that the dog was, in harness and all of those sorts of things. And he said to me, "He isn't wearing a red coat." And I said, "Well, I explained to him that when I'd left home this morning, that was yesterday morning, it hadn't been raining. And so I had no need for my dog to have his coat on." Anyway, he called his boss up on the radio. Well, I don't know if it was his boss, but he called somebody up on the radio. And this fella repeated everything that the bus driver had said. Eventually, the driver took the passport from me and had and it says Blind Foundation guide dog, and there's a photograph on it of Guss and myself, and he told his boss that on the radio, and then the bus driver got out of his seat and came down onto the platform and had a look at the dog's collar, and eventually they let me go on the bus with him saying, "I'm only doing my job."
Can you describe Guss to me?
You might have to stop me here because I might rave on a bit, because he's the most gorgeous, beautiful big animal. He's more than an animal, he's my friend. In fact, I tell people that Mary, my partner, is my number 1 friend and Guss is my number 2 friend. But Mary, thinks that my number 2 friend is my number 1 friend. And my number 2 friend definitely thinks he's number 1. So he's a great big white standard poodle. He's actually quite tall. He's a beautiful dog, but not only that, he's got the most beautiful nature. He just loves people.
So is this a bit of canine prejudice? A driver looked at him and thought, poodles, they're not guide dogs.
Poodles don't actually look like a manly dog, you see, because they've got lovely big fluffy ears and a curly coat and all of those sorts of things. So I can understand that. But the fact is that he's dressed in his harness, and he's got all the ID that you could wish for,
So to be clear on this, the ID, the passport that you carry, it's got a photo of you and a photo of Guss, and it states that he's a guide dog.
That's exactly right, yes. And on the back side of it, which I don't think the driver turned around, but on the back of the card is actually a quotation from the Human Rights Act. I can't see it, but I believe it's there. At least once a week, a driver will say to me, "Is that one of them blind dogs?" And my response to that, of course, is that if it is one of them blind dogs, then both him and I are in deep trouble, because we're a pair of blind people, or blind objects or something. So, I make light of that kind of a thing. But the fact is that this particular confrontation was the second one that I've had within just over a week.
So how does it make you, how did it make you feel, that whole confrontation and having to argue the point?
I think it's one of those things about it's sort of treating me as a kind of a non-person. And I think one of the difficulties that blind people have is that there's lots of kind of stereotypes. You know, the most common one is that when you explain to someone that you can't see, they raise their voice to you. And I don't think they mean it in a malicious way. I just think that it's that kind of a thing about, oh, you're poor person. And I'm not a poor person. My eyes don't work, but that doesn't stop my brain from working. And so I'm just an ordinary person who happens to have a disability called sight loss, you know.
So, George, what would you say to the bus company about what you expect from them and how they can do better?
Please train your staff. We want somebody to explain to the drivers that we're just human beings like they are, except that we might stumble a wee bit sometimes and we might have to kind of need a wee bit of help, but we're still bus passengers. You know, we're still part of the rest of the human race. I think that's what it is, really.
And Guss is part of the deal.
And Guss is part of it. Oh, Lisa. Yeah, he is. I remember ringing Mary up and saying, Mary, I've fallen in love again, because I waited for a year for Guss, and it was almost instant that, you know, that we bonded together.
And that is George Taggart, bus user. We will talk to Metlink after 6.